All right. So week 2 of Foundations of Biblical Life. Now we start the actual material. I know there was a lot last week, but this is where we actually start honing in on what it means to wrestle with our faith. So last time I've done that, well, the last 2 times I've done this, I've done with smaller groups and kind of honing it in, refining it, getting it ready for kind of what we're doing here. And I have changed around what information goes first. If you remember last week, we talked about the question that all of us, or the thing that drives most all of us. Remember the radio station, WIIFM, what's in it for me? And so because of that, I've often started the experience focusing in on the who is man and what is the nature of humanity. However, when we talk about the foundation of life, the true foundation is what we say about God. Now, I've hold that statement true, whether you believe in God, gods with little g, lots of s's, or no God at all. Ultimately, there is some deciding seat in reality. And if you say there is no God, you are the deciding seat. And I don't say that in a bad way. I'm not saying you're arrogant. I'm just saying if you believe there's no God, then you are the ultimate decider of reality. If you say that there is a certain kind of God, that shapes your reality. So we are going to start with the nature and character of God and work towards the nature and character of mankind as we go. I think that's more important with it. I'm also going to start incorporating some more little mini discussions as we go into the room here because of just the nature of how large this class is and time frames that we have. In this part of it, kind of shorter answers. I mean, if you got something really weighing on your heart, don't feel like I'm cutting you off, but shorter answers. And then when we go into the group time, that's where we really start to dig in. So use this booklet, write in it. I've got pins on almost all the tables, and if not, there's one next to you. And start thinking of the questions you have. Start writing them down. If God prompts you on something, if something sticks, wow, I don't know why, but that feels like there's something to that. Just highlight that, write it down, and then go back and let's explore it as we go into our group time. So as we talk about the foundation of reality, experience is called Foundations of Biblical Life. We are talking about what sits as the most basic layer. A.W. Tozer, if you have heard that name, says, what comes to mind when we think of God is the most important thing about us. What does that mean? Well, if God is the ultimate in reality, however you define the ultimate, all-encompassing thing, then what you believe about that ultimate, all-encompassing thing shapes everything else. We're going to talk about foundations here in just a moment. But what I want to think through this is, first, let's wrestle with that a little bit. You've got that blank space with some writing on there and the 3 questions logo. Remember, we're going to be digging into the 3 questions throughout this experience. The 3 questions of discipleship. What does this really mean? What does this mean for my life? What is God calling me to do about it? So let's just get a little bit of popcorn chatter on this. What comes to mind when you think about God? Anybody who wants to say? Love. Peace. Power. Okay. Forgiveness. Creation. Okay. Holiness. Justice. Merciful. Provision and mystery. Okay, so when I was a youth pastor, figured out these nice little games. It's not an icebreaker, but you've got this little space in front of you here. We're going to do one of my favorites here. So we are going to name 3 things, and then I'm going to ask you to give 2 descriptor words for each of those things. So I'll walk you through it, but everybody knows what an adjective is, a word that modifies another word. So we're going to come up with another word. So the first thing we're going to look at is your favorite animal. I just want you to write it down. What is your favorite animal? And then I want you to, you know this one? I've done it before right, with you probably. Then I want you to come up with 2 words that describe your favorite animal. 2 words that describe your favorite animal. So mine is a lion, and I would say powerful and fierce, right? Those might be my words. Maybe, just maybe. So an animal, 2 words that describe it. The second one, hold on, I'm gonna ask you in a minute, but I want you to, this way everybody can think through these consecutively. The second one is your favorite color. Your favorite color, and then I want you to use that same thing, 2 words that describe that color. So mine is blue, and my words usually are something along the lines of regal, peaceful, serene, deep. Those, but again, pick two. The last one, I know you're thinking through these, so it's okay. For those who are still working on them, not rushing, you can just keep going with them. The last one is your favorite scene in nature. Your favorite scene in nature. So, for example, mine is legitimately the mountains. The first time I did this game, I was living in Oklahoma at the time. And I said it last week, I'll say it again. If you've never been to Oklahoma, if there weren't buildings in the way, you could just see. Just ongoing, right? It's flat, is basically what I'm saying. Mountains are my favorite. So powerful, majestic, like awe-inspiring. Those are some words that describe those for me. And if, this is really one of those if you nasty kind of things, if you'd like to play the game in non-sensitive company, you can then do your favorite ice cream. And 2 words that describe your favorite ice cream. So those are your tasks, the 3 main ones, and then I'm going to reveal the magician's secret here in just a moment to it. So first of all, let's get, anybody who wants to share, Stan volunteered already first, name your, whichever of those you'd like to name.
Favorite animal.
Okay.
Dog. They love you unconditionally.
Okay.
And they're loyal as can be. Yeah.
Okay. Keep in mind what you said with those. Okay. Somebody else. Any of those 3, leave off ice cream for now.
Favorite color?
Okay. Go ahead.
Cobalt blue.
That's a very specific one.
Very specific.
Okay.
And it's deep and it's powerful.
Okay. I like that. I had both the ladies here.
Mine is pink and it's soft and delicate.
Okay. Go ahead, Jono.
Black.
Yeah?
Yeah. Simple and goes better.
I love it. I love it. Do you want yours?
I did elephant and they're loving and strong.
Okay. So if you're near somebody that you trust enough to share yours with, you might whisper them because you're going to start laughing at each other here in just a moment. But this is scientifically proven. It's not. This is psychologically validated, though, across every time I've done this. So here's what this experiment really did. These colors, animals, these scenes in nature, and ice cream, they tell you what you really think about some of the deepest things in life. So first and foremost, let's go with the animal. You have your animal in mind. Think of those descriptive words, right? So the animal that you described is what you are or have been looking for in a relational partner. Stan, they're loyal. You start. So my favorite was I did this at a Kentucky youth camp one time, and one of the kids was trying to be a little bit of a smart aleck, and I said, "Okay, what's your animal?" And he goes, "It's a paraplegic turtle." I said, "What's your descriptive words?" And he gave some things. I was like, "That's going to come back and bite you, buddy." But there you go. So now you know the deepest desire of your heart. If you're looking for in your spouse, if you need to have marriage counseling now, you're looking for that thing right there. All right, the second one was the color. So think of your color. Think of your 2 descriptive words. The color signifies what you most truly and deeply think about yourself. I know, simple goes with everything. Yeah. Oh, I heard some ahas, though, in the room, right? Yeah. Okay. Your scene in nature. Think about your scene in nature. For me, the mountains, they're regal, they're awe-inspiring. And wouldn't you know it, what you use to describe your favorite scene in nature is what you truly believe about or look for in God. Interesting, huh? Anybody want to ask about what ice cream stands for?
Yes.
Okay. Well, it's 3 letters. It's what you actually think about SEX. So I'm not going to ask you to read yours out loud, but I will just say, whenever somebody blurted out smooth and satisfying, it was like, okay, done. So don't use that one in mixed company, even though I just did. Okay, so what comes to mind when we think about God is the most important thing about us. So I'm going to tell a story about Cliff Sanders real quick. Dr. Cliff Sanders, you can see him on screen. That's his face. Remember, if you weren't here last week, this was the chair of the Biblical Studies Department in Mid-America. We called him the sheriff because while the president of the university thought he ran the school, it was Cliff that called the shots. So back in the day, Cliff was a pastor. And he was serving in a church. I think this story happened in Lake Charles, Louisiana, which I say that only because I actually interned at the very church that Cliff was pastor at. So I got to hear all sorts of fun stories of Cliff before he was Dr. Sanders. But back in the day, they used to do these things for pastors called hospital rounds, right? Not just where you, like, if you go to the hospital, I would love to come and visit you and pray with you, right? Like, that seems appropriate. However, at least in certain cities, they just had pastors who would go to any hospital room and come in and say, "Hi, I'm a pastor. I would like to talk to you." And this one time, young Pastor Cliff stepped into a room with a man who was going through quite a lot, let's just say. He was very bedridden, and he was going to stay very bedridden for a long time. And so when Dr. Sanders first introduced himself, the man was like, "Oh, great, someone to talk to. I hate sitting in my bed." And then he dropped the words, "Oh, by the way, I'm a pastor." And the tone of the conversation changed. For about the next 15 minutes, as Cliff describes it, this young man tore apart God. As Cliff would say, he ripped him from stem to sternum. He talked about the God that kills babies, that causes cancer, that destroys relationships, and just over and over and over hammered in just how much this God person was not one that he wanted anything to do with. And Cliff sat there, silent, didn't say a word, and just listened. And then at just the right moment, Cliff always, like, I have a habit now of clearing my throat. That was his go-to. That'd be how you knew Cliff was about to say something. So, you know what? You haven't proven to me that you don't believe in God. This was his quote. I don't believe in that kind of God either. In fact, no sane person should believe in the kind of God that you just described. You didn't convince me that you don't believe in God. You proved to me you're not an idiot, that you have a brain in your skull. That changed the conversation a little bit, right? The guy's like, what? I thought this was going a different direction. So once Cliff unsettled the room a little bit, he started to explain to this gentleman the God that he believes in. And see, the more we wrestle with this, the more we see that the view we have of God shapes everything that we do, that we say, and that we think about. I think about this story of Stephen Fry. He's a British comedian, actor, film luminary, had hands in starting things like, I'm pretty sure he helped start The Office, British version, things like that. But Stephen Fry was interviewed on British television one time, and they said, so you're an atheist, right? Tell me why you don't believe in God. And he got this appropriately smug look on his face and just said, cancer in babies? Really? And you think God exists? And that was it. Years later, I was at Walmart, of all places, and I picked up a bag of great value potato chips. I looked on them, and as I was looking at the calorie information, I happened to let my eyes scroll down a little bit farther, and it said, this product is known to cause defects in pregnancies and cancer in California. I don't know why it's only California. You're safe to eat them here in Colorado, but California apparently tests these things more. And so I was thinking about Stephen Fry's statement, cancer in babies? Well, that must have been God, right? And yet, for-profit organizations that are trying to make a little more for-profit have to put a warning label on their potato chips that this has been known to cause birth defects. But to Stephen Fry, that is the big aha, I gotcha. I love watching Penn and Teller, but not like their magic stuff as much. I love listening to Penn because he is a very dedicated atheist, but he's very intellectually open and honest about it. Like he'll share stories. In fact, sidetrack, I didn't mean to talk about this, but sidetrack real quick. Years ago, he had a video story where he talked about a man who came up to him and gave him a Bible. And he's like, most people think I was mad at that guy for giving me a Bible. He goes, let me just tell you this. If you believe, I don't, by the way. I think it's stupid to believe this. Not me, him. But if you believe that there's an all-powerful being and there is an eternal hell and that I'm going to go there if I don't follow that God, how much do you have to hate a person not to tell them about that God? I was like, ooh, again, not a Christian. But wrestling with the idea of what we believe about God shapes everything. So let's talk about foundations here. To seek to understand God, it by definition, the ultimate thing is to try and put a rope around infinity. It's to try to grasp all there is to know. It's to peer into the depths of creation itself. Maybe you were wondering why on the front of your book there is a Coke can floating in the ocean. It's because of this line that I put in here years ago. To think that we understand all there is to know about God is like a Coke can swimming in the ocean, convinced of itself that it has swallowed the entire sea. But realistically, it's just full of itself. Right? Wow. All right. So to say we know enough about God is to say we are full of ourselves. Chris Hodges says, if God always has to fit everything into our understanding, if he always has to fit it into our limited human minds, he will always be less. Some of you are familiar with the verse, my ways are greater than your ways. My thoughts are greater than your thoughts. That's in your Bible. Chris Hodges says, again, he will be a very small God whom we can handle, a very safe God that never disrupts our lives. So the reality is, first and foremost, we can't know all there is to know about God. Like literally, you're talking about a being that sits outside of time, space, and creation because he created time, space, and creation with just the words of his mouth. There's not a lot about AI that I'm like super jazzed about and think it's the greatest thing ever, although I did use it a lot to create this, not the material, but the presentation. But the idea that you can talk to some disembodied thing and say, hey, would you create an image of this, that does that, and then it just does it? I'm like, is that what God did? He's like, Alexa, create the universe. Except for it wasn't quite like that, right? Biblically, right? But this is a being that created us, that sits outside of time, space, and all of that. So for us to say, like, I know all there is to know about God is a pretty arrogant position to take. However, the Bible and God's actions across history reveal to us a God who desires to be known. So to say that we can't know anything about God is equally ignorant. God desires to know us and to be known by us. So if that's the case, while we may not be able to understand everything there is to know about God, we do get to start to know him. While we can't have all of the answers, we do live in a world and a reality where there are answers, where God does speak. Now, if you wanted to get to the Theology 101 side of it, the two things we just talked about are general revelation and specific revelation. General revelation being Romans chapter 1. Those who know God can know God because what is known about God is apparent to all. It can be seen in creation, right? And then you go on to Hebrews where it says, but the very specific witness of this is the nature and character of Jesus. We're going to talk about in a couple weeks here. So to say we cannot know God is arrogant, but to say we know everything about God is also a problem. So we sit somewhere in this happy medium where we are understanding more the further we walk with him. William Temple once said, if you have an incorrect view of God, the more religious you are, the worse it is. It would be better for you to be an atheist. That's a pretty bold statement. I don't walk around too often going, I wonder who I can make an atheist today. Hopefully my life doesn't lead to that. But here's what he's talking about. If the foundation that you're building your view of reality upon is cracked and crumbled, everything that's built upon it will crack and crumble as well. There's nothing that goes deeper into our heart, mind, and soul than who we say God is and what we know about God. This is our foundation. So years ago, my wife and I were buying a house. It was our first house. It was a starter house. And I'm going to feel really old as soon as I start telling the story, because back when we bought our first house, we only paid $70,000 for it. And my gosh, that felt like so much money. We had a house payment of $800 a month. And wow, I didn't know how we were going to make it, right? But here's the deal. At some point, it was time to sell that house. And we were thinking, everybody's told us buying a house is the best investment you can ever make, right? Well, we lived in Oklahoma at the time. Last week I shared about the tornado shelter story, right? The same reason they don't build a lot of basements, if any, in Oklahoma is the same reason that our house was not going to get the valuation we hoped it would, because the shifting red clay causes concrete to expand, contract. And wouldn't you know it, the person who was in charge of assessing our house to see how much it would sell for said, I've got bad news for you. You have foundation problems. And I was like, cool. What does that mean? Well, notice those cracks along the wall. Did you notice that your doors don't close the way they should? I'm like, oh, that's what that is? Okay. Well, that doesn't sound good. What do we do about it? Well, it's not going to be cheap, friend. There's two options. One, our pillars. We dig holes in the ground and we put these big concrete slabs way deep under there that support your concrete slab. It's going to be, and I don't remember the number he said, but it was in the thousands and I had in the hundreds. I had tens of dollars to deal with, and he was giving me numbers that were way bigger than that. He said, or you can go the cheap way. Won't fix the problem long term, but for now it'll help. We'll drill a hole in your floor and spray foam underneath your house, and that will raise up the foundation. It won't fix the cracks. It won't cause the things to come back together or do anything like that, but it'll at least get it to buy until the next person has to deal with it. And that's what we did. Yeah, that's what we did, right? But if you are a realtor or if you've ever bought a house, if somebody says, ooh, there's foundation problems, that's like a deal breaker. That's a big deal because your walls start to crack. Your doors start to shift and shimmy, right? Foundations are important. Well, God is our foundation. What we say about God, regardless of gods or no gods. So Dr. Sanders says, if there is a God, It should be your life's business to get to know him correctly for who he is and what he respects. Why? Well, let's picture a GPS. Oh, sorry. The foundation of Christian living is knowing the kind of God that God really is, which is incredibly important. Stephen Furtick adds to that, every dysfunction begins with a distortion about who God is. That's why, in addition to knowing who he is, it's important to understand who he isn't. We're going to talk about both those things. So crack foundations. I don't know about you, but up until I joined the city of Arvada and was forced to learn street rotations, I use a GPS to go anywhere that isn't in my immediate vicinity, right? And half the time, if it's across the street, I still need a GPS to get there. So if you're like me, this will resonate with you. If you're not, just picture a world where you didn't know your directions, okay? All right. So you're going somewhere you've never been before, and it's a very long ways away. You plug into the GPS the address, but guess what? You're trying to get to, I don't know, pick a state, Montana. There also happens to be that same street with that same number in, I don't know, say Idaho. And you plugged in Idaho. Your GPS is taking you to the direction you told it to go. You clicked the button and the voice said, okay, here we go. But if you're trying to get to Montana and the directions are leading you to Idaho, following the directions of your GPS is not going to get you there. The further you keep going into that GPS direction, the farther away, well, Idaho, Montana, okay, let's say one of them's in Texas. How's that? How about that? Let's say Montana and Texas, right? You're heading towards Texas. The further you go towards that, the less likely it is you're going to land at your destination. So it's been said that having an incorrect view of God is like being on a journey towards the wrong destination. Progress isn't found by completing your trip. You actually make more progress by humbling yourself, going back to the beginning and starting over. Right? It's hard to think that. But it makes that William Temple quote make a little more sense. If you have an incorrect view of God, it might be better for you to be an atheist. Not encouraging that online, I'm just saying. Right? Because when you get to where you're going and find it's not the right place, what happens? You end up in the wrong spot. However, unlike a simple trip to Texas versus Montana, which might shape you into a certain sort of person, God being your foundation means that you build the rest of your life, your rest of your understanding of reality, the rest of the way you interact with others, with your family, even the way you think about yourself upon that foundation. So it's not just that you're going in the wrong direction, it's also about the person you're becoming in the journey. So if that's the case, how do we get our distorted views of God? Well, I've got a few places that have been proven in there. First of all, significant relationships early in life. This is scientifically vetted. Social psychologists have found that the basic elements of your personality are formed by the age of 5. I argue it's probably a bit sooner than that. 2 reasons. One's named Logan, the other's named Jazzy. They happen to be my children. When Logan was in the womb, we did my mom wanted and paid for, and therefore it allowed us to do 4D ultrasounds, right? It's not just that blob of static on it. For those of us who are old enough to remember when the TV just went and that's all you saw, like that's what most ultrasounds look like. Like, look at my baby, isn't it cute? I'm like, look at the TV static. I don't know what that is. I'll trust you, right? But these 4D ones, oh my goodness, you could see facial definition. You could see certain things. And what the doctor said, our technician, as she was going through is, man, this little guy's got a personality. It's like, what are you talking about? Well, every time I put the wand over him, he blocks it. He doesn't like it. And sure enough, if you look at one of our 4D ultrasounds, she got him right then. He's doing this. Yeah. Also, whenever we listened to, or we were watching the show The Big Bang Theory a lot, that was around that time, 2012. Anytime the theme song came in, my wife was like, he's bopping along in there. Also, and this one doesn't hold up, I don't think, I sure hope not, but whenever I would put my hand on my wife's belly, Logan would put his butt up against her belly, like it was a TV screen, and I would pat it. Yeah. My daughter Jaslyn is adopted, if you couldn't tell. My wife and I are white, and my daughter's not. So we never had questions about whether we were going to inform her if she was adopted or not. We were pretty sure she was going to figure it out. But her story's a little difficult. Her mom, her bio mom, it's my wife's cousin, and I won't share her name because this is online and all that, but let's just say what we've come to tell Jazzy is she made some choices that weren't safe for you or for her. My daughter was born 7 months after her biological sister, which I didn't think was possible. But she was born at, I think, 22, 23 weeks gestation. Either way, we have a picture of my wife holding my daughter when she was born, and she fits in her hand like a kitten. That's how small she was. She was born into the foster care system, and we immediately said, game on. But there was hoops. So she had to go into foster care first. She went into a family. Family said, we're going to care for her. And they disrupted, which basically means they said, she's too much. Take her somewhere else. So the next family that she got to, we were actually in the process of moving to Ohio. And there were some concerns about with us moving to Ohio, whether or not we could complete an adoption process. And this other family decided that, well, they would like to adopt Jazzy. And so we said, if that's what's in her best interest, we'll go along with this. So they started the adoption process with my daughter, and they disrupted. She was too much for them. So the third home before us, because that was it, we were done. She was ours. I don't care what the government said at that point, was this sweet little old lady named Betty, 80 years old. Her job in life was to take care of these little babies and watch them over until they got to their forever home. So Jaslyn was, I don't remember exactly, 18 months old, 15 months old. She was barely one, a little over one, when we finally got her. They flew her out to Ohio, and they said throughout this training we did, there's going to be certain things that are going to stick with her for life. They talked about some of the trauma and problems that disrupted babies, kids in the foster care system that keep getting placed in different homes, etc. have. But in my mind, I'm going, she's one. This will be fine, right? That'll be fine. She had to be a little bit older. She could walk. So we met her, right? And she adapted to us quick. Like, she was ours, like, right away. She knew that we were her people, and she came right to us and all that. But here's where the story makes me think this statement is so absolutely true. For years of her life, whenever a stranger came to our house, she clung to our legs. Somehow she knew that meant that person was coming to take her away. At one. To this day, my daughter has trust issues with the universe. If we're driving at the age of, she's now 10, but she's been doing this for about 7 years now, she'll ask questions like, do you think we have enough gas to get where we're going? Where, how long is it going to take us? Where are we going? Which direction are we going to get there? She has trust issues built way deep down in. The basic elements of our personality are formed by the age of 5. So where do we get our crooked views of God? From relationships early in our life. Here's where it gets a little bit harder, especially for us guys in the room. You can say what you want. This is not an anti-equality room. But it's been proven time and time again that our view of God is disproportionately shaped by our earthly father and our early relationships with him. Tried to fight that myself. My dad, for those who don't know, was a twice convicted felon. He was in prison for a good portion of my later years. For my younger years, he just wasn't there. He had other aspirations, learning to become a drug dealer for one, but two, women. I mean, let's just be honest. If there was a new girl in the picture, that was about all he cared about. So when I went through this experience the first time, one of the things that before I knew how to ask the question, what does this mean for my life? I was wrestling with my view of God. Not that I thought he doesn't exist. Not that I doubted the omnis, that he's omnipresent, omniscient, omnibenevolent, all those things. I just realized at one point, when I pray, I'm not sure I really believe there's anybody else listening on the other end. When I look to heaven, I know he's out there, but I'm pretty sure he's doing other things. And I started going through this very experience. I happened to also be watching Smallville at the time. That was my college experience, where Clark Kent's wrestling with his dad and who his father is, all that. So Superman and I were going through something at the same time. I felt okay. But I went outside one night and just had it out with God. And I realized I'm not mad at God. My view of God is that he, and not as much anymore, but I still wrestle with this to this day. Deep down, my view that was shaped by my father's absence of God was, well, he's out there. He created me. He loves me. But I don't think he's really interested in my life. He's not someone I can talk to. That was my view of my dad. To this day, as a pastor, I still wrestle with that as in the back of my mind, what if that's God as well? So, let's add to that now. Carey Nieuwhof on his amazing podcast said something one time that stuck with me. He said, "This current generation is the most fatherless generation in known history that did not lose their fathers to war." So that means we're only on the first how'd you get it broken, and probably a lot of the people that are in this room are already going, oh, yeah, dang, right? But it also means even if you had a good dad, earthly father who was there for you, cared for you, gave you a really good image of what it means to be a good person, and helped you to understand a really loving and kind God, the person next to you probably doesn't have that benefit. So if you're just one of those people who's like, how do I learn to be more kind? Let this be one of those things that starts to sink in when you look at people and realize there's probably a greater chance that they have an absent father wound than that they don't. And if they do, that's actually shaping the way they see all of reality. Wow. So let's talk about this a little bit. The next thing is through uncritically reflecting on life. I probably need to update this statistic, but Zippia.com told me a few years ago that we receive an average of 10,000 advertising messages a day. This is increasingly up from the 1970s, where at least 5 times what the average person experienced then. So if for no other reason than the patience and the bandwidth we have, the fact that we oftentimes are just done and just want to, quote unquote, shut off our brains, it's often more likely that we just put things back there and say, I'll think about that later. I'll work through that later. But sometimes really big things happen in life. And we start to pick things up without even realizing it. Sometimes they're harmless, right? God never gives anything to people that, they can't handle, right? Well, except for that's not biblical. That's not life accurate. That's not what Jesus said. He said, in this world you will have trouble. But we just pick up these sayings. We pick up these little aphorisms and axioms and these little moments of, oh, yeah, that's probably it. And we don't think through it. The worst? Oh, I do love me some television at times. But there's stuff on TV that's said, and we just, oh, yeah, okay. We don't even think about it. It's funny, especially if it's funny. We laugh, it sinks in, we move on. And then later on, we don't realize, where did I get that idea? Through uncritically reflecting on life. Lucas Miles says in his book, Good God, as the events of our lives unfold, our interpretation of those happenings have caused us to invent a God who is the author of the beliefs we now have of ourselves. In other words, as Bonhoeffer said, when we can't make sense of the senseless, we put God in the gaps. When we can't make sense of the senseless, we put God in the gaps. Perhaps you've heard someone say, I don't know why God is putting me through this. Maybe you've heard someone say, I don't know why God would allow this. That's deep. That's not to be ignored, but it does arrive oftentimes out of something that we haven't actually critically wrestled through. Oftentimes we say it must have been God's will. But that could be dangerous if we start giving to God's will things that are against his will. So, quick example. My pastor, when I was a youth pastor, I served under a man by the name of Dave Dooley. This is him right here. It's a good guy. I like Dave. You'd like him too. He grew up in the Kentucky, Appalachia area there, and his father was a coal miner. As you know, maybe you don't, coal mining is one of the most dangerous jobs you can possibly do. And one day there was a problem. I believe it was a cave-in, something like that. But whatever happened, Dave's dad did not walk away from work that day. A little bit later on, they had a funeral. And a wonderfully kind, beautiful older woman came up to Dave at the funeral and said, "Child, God must have just needed one more angel up in heaven." And Dave told the story for years of how he wrestled with that, how that sat with him. God needed my dad, so God took my dad from me. And he said the most intellectually and faith-filled, honest answer I had that I didn't know to tell that woman that day is, don't you think I needed my dad just a little bit more? What kind of God is created in our minds from a simple offhanded comment like God must have just needed one more angel up in heaven? God must have a greater plan for your life. Though that latter statement might be true, but what does it do to our hearts? So when we uncritically reflect on life and assign to God the things that are not God, we end up creating a God, as Cliff Sanders would say, that no sane person should believe in. Lucas Miles goes on to say, do I not have that yet? Hold on. Oh, I just said that statement, that's why. Lucas Miles goes on to say, everything does happen for a reason, but that doesn't mean God is behind every reason. To see our situations as God's plan not only strips people of their responsibility to choose, but it also villainizes God and blames him for the circumstances we experience in the world. In fact, much of the pain we have in life comes down to human choice and not God at its epicenter. Yeah. Yeah. So, before we go into our discussion groups, one last thing I want to talk about here. The three wills of the universe. The three wills. So most people say, oh, it must have been God's will. Well, there's actually three wills biblically. First of all, there is God's will. Scripture is clear that God has plans. He has desires. He has a will for his children, for his people. But we're going to talk about free will versus determinism later on in the experience. But God has given mankind free will. And spoilers a little bit for when we get to that discussion in several weeks, but we really do have free will. Like Adam and Eve in the garden could have chosen not to eat the fruit. They had that option. God had a backup plan already in place. But our will oftentimes gets in the way. And here's the thing that we're going to explore when we get to that free will section. Can we really have free will if God can say, but not this time? At what point do we say God should have stepped in right now? So an example, when I was an officer, we had an early morning call. Luckily, it wasn't in our jurisdiction, so I didn't have to go to it. But somebody decided to get drunk at 2 a.m. And there happened to be a mom with her 2-year-old little girl driving home from a late shift at work. She was down on her luck, doing everything she could to survive, and so she brought her little baby girl to work. Drunk driver met with mom. Mom did not survive. Little baby girl now has to grow up in a world without her mom. And someone might look at her and say, God must have just needed one more angel up in heaven. And that little girl hopefully can critically reflect on life and use the ability to think that God gave us and say, I don't know about that. But here's what I think. This isn't like in the Bible. This isn't me saying this is how you should interpret reality. This is just me saying this is how I process that. God can't take away that drunk driver's free will. Because at what point does he take away our free will? You say, oh God, I didn't think this was going to get to adultery. You should have stopped me when it was just a porn addiction. Okay, so does he stop you with the first image? Does he stop you with the fifth? Does he stop you when it starts really getting dirty? Well, at what point? So does he stop the drunk driver on the first drink? Does he stop him on the third drink? Where does he come in and say, okay, you no longer have the right to choose. You've made some bad decisions here. At the same time, I do believe that God was talking to that individual and laying on his heart, this isn't the best plan. Hey, why don't you call a designated driver? Hey, child, son, hey, why don't you reconsider this? And through a process of going, I got this. I'm good. Made a decision that ended someone's life. So the will of man, no, he lived.
No, I know, but he'll be spending the rest of his life in jail.
Well, that's true, but yeah. Anyway, so the will of God, the will of man, but then there's also this third will out there. So Jesus talks about in John 10:10, he says, I have come that you might have life and have it more abundantly. But he talks about this other force. He says the thief comes to steal and to kill and to destroy. Throughout Scripture, there's this other figure. We're going to talk about that other figure, biblically called the Satan, the accuser. But we'll talk about the nature and how Satan went to become the snake and all that kind of stuff later. All we really want to discuss right at this early stage is that there is that voice that's like, what if you just drank one more? Can't hurt anything, right? There is that nudge that comes from somewhere and you're like, I'm pretty sure that's not me thinking that, but I don't know, maybe. Sounds enough like me that maybe I trust it. Sounds enough like truth. It's just like right over here. It can't be that bad, right? So there is the will of the enemy as well. And God allows our will to thwart his will. Because if he didn't, we would be robots. We'll talk about that. We're getting deep waters here soon. However, what we can know from this, Romans 8:28 promises that in all things, God is working everything for the good of those who call upon his name. That doesn't mean God caused all of the situations, that God took my friend Dave's father, that God put the beer into that drunk driver's hands, but God has plans. Jeremiah 29:11 says, for I know the plans I have for you. Which is encouraging because that means when we get to the third or fourth S on plans, God still has some more S's left over for us, right? God is our king, but his revealed character is that he is a servant king who does not overrule or override what we decide. So we're going to stop there for the conversation or the lecture, if you want to call it this, the opening salvo. And we're going to break into groups. Before we do, I want you to start going through your mind of what we've already talked about here. And start critically reflecting. Now, there's this great verse. Jesus was confronted by some legalistic jerks. That's my interpretation. That's not the biblical. Yeah, usually they're called the scribes and Pharisees. We're usually, they're usually the bad guys in the story. And they come to Jesus and they say, "Teacher, great teacher, what is the great commandment in all of the law?" And he says, "Well, you shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart, all of your mind, all of your strength, all of your soul." So one of the things Dr. Sanders talked about in this original experience is we don't have to have a headless Christianity, right? Oh, we feel Jesus with our hearts, but we disconnect our brain when we come to encounter him or come to worship. The reality is, the more we explore truth, the more we explore God, the more that we worship God with all of our heart, mind, body, strength, soul, the more we are becoming more like him. And I said it last week, I'll say it at least one more time today. The nation that God's word was entrusted to is called the nation of Israel. Jacob wrestled, be Yaakov actually, wrestled with God in the middle of the night. He would not let him go until God blessed him, and God popped his hip out of socket, gave him a limp, and said, "You are no longer Jacob. You shall be called Israel." Israel means one who wrestles with God. So when you go through this and when you're in your group, don't think any question is unfaithful. Biblically, the opposite of faith is not doubt, it's disobedience. To know what you should do and actively go the other direction. Doubt is always, well, when it's explored, it's celebrated in Scripture. Remember last week we talked about the Bereans. The Bereans were of a more noble character because they took what the apostles said back to Scripture and tested it to see if these things were so. So what we do in these groups is to be Berean, to ask questions that open up and explore what is God saying in this. So the three questions: what does this mean? What does it really mean? Not just what I think it means on the surface, but what have I dug into? What does it mean for my life? And what am I called to do about it? So I'm going to end the video right here.